Have you ever wondered how Japan, a small island nation, rose to become a major world power in the late 19th century? A huge part of that story is the First Sino-Japanese War, a conflict that completely changed the balance of power in East Asia. It's a story of ambition, modernization, and a clash between an ancient empire and a rising one. Let's dive into what really happened. The year is 1894, and the stage is set in Korea. At the time, Korea was a tributary state of Qing Dynasty China, but Japan, fresh off its Meiji restoration, was eager to expand its influence. Both nations saw Korea as strategically vital. The spark that lit the fuse was a massive peasant uprising in Korea, known as the Donghak Rebellion. The Korean king, unable to control the situation, asked China for help. China sent in troops, as it had done before, but this time Japan used this as a pretext to send its own army to Korea, claiming it was there to protect its interests. Suddenly, two powerful armies were face to face on foreign soil, and tensions were about to explode. On the surface, it might have looked like an even match. Qing China was a vast empire with immense resources and a massive population. Japan was small, and just a few decades earlier, it had been a feudal society. But appearances can be deceiving. Japan had spent the last 30 years rapidly modernizing its military, economy, and government, learning from Western powers. Their army was equipped with modern rifles and artillery. Their soldiers were well-trained and disciplined under a unified command structure, and their navy had new, fast warships. In stark contrast, the Qing military was a patchwork of different regional armies, each loyal to its own commander rather than a central government. The famous Beiyang army and Beiyang fleet were considered the most modern, but even they were plagued with problems. Corruption was rampant, money meant for new ships, and ammunition often ended up in officials' pockets. Training was inconsistent, and their equipment was a mix of modern and hopelessly outdated weapons. This lack of unity and preparation would prove fatal. The war began before it was even officially declared. In July 1894, the Japanese Navy ambushed Chinese ships at the Battle of Pyongyang, sinking a transport vessel carrying over 1,000 Chinese soldiers. This was a brutal opening move. On land, the Japanese forces quickly outmaneuvered and overwhelmed the Chinese troops stationed in Korea. The Keilan battle was at Pyongyang in September. Despite the Chinese having fortified positions, the Japanese army executed a coordinated multi-pronged attack that completely routed the Qing forces and secured their control over Korea. Just 2 days after the victory at Pyongyang, the two navies clashed in the largest battle of the war, the Battle of the Yalu River. This was the moment of truth for China's prized Beiyang fleet. The Chinese fleet had larger battleships, but the Japanese ships were faster and had quick-firing guns. The Japanese commander, Admiral Ito Tsukiyuki, used superior tactics, forming a line to concentrate fire on the disorganized Chinese formation. While the Chinese flagship, the Dingguan, put up a heroic fight, several Chinese ships were sunk, and the rest were forced to retreat to their base at Wei Highway. The Beiyang fleet was battered and demoralized, effectively handing naval supremacy to Japan. With control of the sea, Japan could now take the war directly to Chinese territory. Their armies crossed the Yalu River into Manchuria, capturing key cities like Port Arthur, also known as Lish. The fall of Port Arthur was a massive blow, not just militarily, but also psychologically. It was supposed to be a heavily fortified naval base. From there, Japanese forces pushed into the Liaodong Peninsula. Meanwhile, another Japanese army landed on the Shandong Peninsula and laid siege to the last refuge of the Beiyang fleet. The final chapter for the Beiyang fleet was tragic. Trapped in the harbor, blockaded by the Japanese Navy, and bombarded by artillery from captured land forts, their situation was hopeless. Supplies were low, morale was non-existent, and the leadership was in disarray. Rather than see his entire fleet fall into enemy hands, the commander, Admiral Ding Rushang, chose to scuttle the remaining ships and then took his own life. The destruction of the Beiyang fleet, once the pride of Asia, was a symbol of the Qing Dynasty's total and humiliating defeat. With its best army crushed and its navy destroyed, China had no choice but to sue for peace. In April 1895, The two sides signed the Treaty of Shimonoseki. The terms were devastating for China. First, China had to recognize the full and complete independence and autonomy of Korea, which in reality meant ceding its influence there to Japan. Second, China was forced to cede huge territories to Japan. The island of Taiwan, the Penghu Islands, and the strategically important Liaodong Peninsula, which included Port Arthur. Third, China had to pay a massive war indemnity of 200 million taels of silver. This was a crippling amount, equivalent to several years of the Qing government's entire revenue. Finally, China had to open several more cities to Japanese trade. The outcome of the First Sino-Japanese War sent shockwaves across the world. Japan was now recognized as the dominant power in East Asia, a new player on the imperial stage. The victory fueled its expansionist ambitions, which would eventually lead to conflicts with Russia and, decades later, World War II. For China, the defeat was a national humiliation of unprecedented scale. It exposed the deep-seated weaknesses of the Qing Dynasty and proved that superficial modernization was not enough. This disaster sparked a wave of intense soul-searching and radical calls for change. It directly led to reform movements and, ultimately, the revolutionary activities that would overthrow the dynasty just a few years later. The war didn't just end a battle. It ended an era and redrew the map of power in Asia for the century to come. Thanks for watching. If you found this piece of history interesting, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the events that shaped our world. See you next time.